Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to another episode of Orange Weekly presented by Crouse Health. My name is Brent, and we are live here on the Syracuse Orange Sports YouTube page. We're live on the Syracuse Orange football page because we're going to be talking some football coming up, friends. Signing day complete for Syracuse. Didn't make much of a blip on the radar yet, but there is some unfinished business there, particularly with the transfer portal coming as well. So Nate Mink is going to hop on in just a few minutes, and we'll go over signing day, talk some football with you as the off season, a very important off season for Syracuse football continues. Where are we at in terms of an offensive coordinator and some other issues that have to be at least addressed with football? So Nate and I will do a little bit of that coming up. We're live on the basketball page as well. It's been a quiet week for Syracuse basketball, a kind of a rare instance in that case after a pretty intense run there of 7 games in 17 days, a lot of brand name teams, a lot of rivalry games, and Syracuse now sits at 5-5. And as we're going to discuss here, never too early to kind of try to carve what kind of NCAA tournament path Syracuse has ahead of it. Come on, Brent, it's not even Christmas. Why are we talking about this? Well, Syracuse's record is why we're talking about this, and if they can recover from what's been not an ideal start by their standards in non-conference play. So all that to come, but just want to remind you that we are live here, but we do put the show on YouTube, so you'll be able to find it on our social media channels. If you're watching on Facebook, it automatically archives on our Facebook pages. And we'll put up a post on syracuse.com as well. So Orange Weekly airs Thursday. Streams, I guess, is more appropriate to say, right? Live Thursdays about 1 o'clock or so. And a programming note, this is going to be our last show of 2021. We're going to take the next couple Thursdays off for the holidays. We'll come back Thursday, January 6th, right around 1 o'clock live, and kind of go through the new year and kind of get into a normal schedule of talking the latest Syracuse sports with you Thursdays live and whenever you want to watch on YouTube. But just know the live show and the show itself, taking a couple of Thursdays off, the next 2 Thursdays, the rest of the year, basically after today. So appreciate the note there. Make sure to leave some comments and questions and follow on the conversation there. I'll highlight some of your comments as we go. So before we get to Nate, and talk some football here in a few minutes. Even though it is December 16th, only 9 shopping days until Christmas, and thank God for gift cards in that sense, because I know this guy hasn't finished his Christmas shopping yet. Hope you guys out there are doing well on your Christmas lists and are getting ready to enjoy a festive holiday season, which, by the way, it is 65 degrees here in Syracuse, New York today. 65 degrees. 9 days before Christmas. Don't like that. Don't like that. I'm sorry. When it's winter, it's winter. When it's Christmas time, I got to be snow outside, okay? It's supposed to get cold right around Christmas. Maybe we'll get some snowflakes flying around then, but I don't know, man. I mean, as much as I enjoy whenever the weather is warm around here, I mean, to play golf in December is kind of a rare thing, but no, I'm sorry. Christmas time, 65 degrees, ain't having it. But hey, I'm sure some people are certainly enjoying it out there. My dog is certainly enjoying the nice weather. You might hear her make a cameo here. She likes to bark at all the UPS guys coming and going with the Christmas season and many deliveries happening around this time. Okay, so for basketball, with 9 days to go until Christmas, here in the middle of December, I haven't even started full-time ACC play. Too early to be talking about the NCAA tournament. Well, for a couple reasons, the answer to that, to me, is no. First of all, we've been told and been sold and it's been expressed to us one way or the other, Jim Boeheim included, that all that matters is making the tournament, right? Now, some will say it's important to do well in your conference. If you're Syracuse, you want to have a strong showing, be a top team in the ACC, maybe even be in contention to win the ACC if you want to kind of assert yourself as one of the top programs in the country, right? Being in the top 25 is important, and it's been a while since Syracuse has been there. I'm not denying those things. There's a lot over the course of a long college basketball season that's important, right? Those things included. But all that matters is making the tournament. And Syracuse has proven time and again that if you let them in the tournament, they will validate that invite. They will make a Sweet 16 run out of nowhere. They will make a Final Four run out of nowhere, at least make it entertaining in the tournament. A couple of years ago, Syracuse had lost, they're 5-5 now. They had lost 4 games by Christmas and made the tournament and lost in the first round to Baylor. So at the very least, you have some sort of validation in making the tournament. That Baylor team ends up becoming the national champion last year, right? So it's all about making the tournament. Well, if you've got 5 non-conference losses at this point, where does that put you? 2 of those losses aren't going to hurt you at all. Auburn and Villanova are not going to hurt Syracuse. Both of those teams are top 25 teams. Both of those teams have the personnel to make deep tournament runs, are going to finish high by all accounts in their respective leagues. There's a couple months to go here. So, certainly injuries and all sorts of things can happen that can knock this conversation sideways. But when the committee looks at Syracuse's resume, Auburn and Villanova are what you would consider quality losses. And the important thing is that their net rankings are high. They're both quad 1 losses for Syracuse. Okay. The other 3 are the problem. VCU, Colgate, and Georgetown. VCU has a top 75 net ranking right now, which actually is probably better than most would anticipate for a team that I believe is 6-4 at this point. Georgetown and Colgate. Georgetown is at 172. Colgate is somewhere in the 100s as well. So the Colgate qualifies as a quad 4 loss for Syracuse at this point. That's bad. That's a no-no. The more of those you have, the more you stick out like a sore thumb. It's kind of the extremes in the conversation. You look in quad 1, you look in quad 4, right? And that's where your resume either vaults you into the tournament or keeps you out of it, right? So it's not just 5 non-conference losses, which is certainly not a good thing. It's the quality of 3 out of 5 of those losses that's going to hurt Syracuse. Now, they got 2 non-conference games left. They've got Lehigh on Saturday, who's a joke, and that team's 1-8 right now. That's a team Syracuse should beat just by remembering what time the game is, right? And Cornell on Tuesday night. Cornell's an 8-win team right now. The Jimmy Boeheim Bowl coming up Tuesday as he faces his old squad in the Carrier Dome. Interesting note that Cornell actually canceled a game this weekend. Their campus has gone to like red alert, no pun intended, for the Cornell Big Red due to a serious outbreak of COVID. I don't want to get into COVID and vaccine discussions. It's interesting though, because that's almost a fully vaccinated campus. And they're saying that like 900 of the cases I'm not sure if it's Omicron or Delta or what the case may be, are unvaccinated individuals on that campus. But just to be safe, they canceled a home game coming up on Sunday. They are still scheduled as of we speak right now here on Thursday afternoon to come to the Carrier Dome on Tuesday, but we're starting to see some games being postponed or flat out canceled once again in college sports. It's been a rash of COVID cases at the NFL level, 75 positive cases, I believe, this week alone. NBA and NHL starting to get into that world again. So we'd be naive to think that college basketball won't be affected one way or the other. I know Duke had to reschedule a game on the fly for Saturday, and we'll see how this gets handled the second time around as we go into the winter and, just something we have to deal with again. But that could factor in too. What if Syracuse gets a few games? Every league's got different policies. Some just forfeit games if you can't play them. If you can postpone them, great. But it's not a situation like we were in the first time around dealing with the pandemic where they kind of bent around those games, made the schedule to accommodate those games, no fans in the stands, right, just to get it going. We're not in that world anymore. So could you lose an important ACC game or two down the road? So that's something to keep an eye on. The other thing is what typically helps Syracuse, of course, is a good record in the ACC, right? Well, what kind of ACC are we looking at this year? Now, with those 5 non-conference losses, let's go back a couple years. So in the 2016-17 season, Syracuse had 10 ACC wins, but they also started 5-5. And that was a year they had 5 non-conference losses, just like this one. That team should have been in the NCAA tournament. Their 10 ACC wins, their schedule, it wasn't like gangbusters, but it was certainly good enough to earn a bid into the tournament. Now, this came a year after they made the tournament when a lot of people said they shouldn't in the 2016 postseason and went to the Final Four, right? So, that was the ultimate kind of, you don't think we should be here? We got something to say about that. The next year, the opposite was true. Most people felt like going into Selection Sunday, like, why not put them in? And they didn't get in, okay? The other time Syracuse was 5-5 with 5 non-conference losses or actually, let me take that back. There was an ACC loss in there, but was 5-5 at this point of the season, was 2019-20. There was no NCAA tournament that year. So the precedent is they're either going to miss the tournament or there is no tournament. There's been a few instances. Mike Waters did a great job chronicling this in his Mike's Mailbox piece. You should read on syracuse.com today. There's been a couple of other times in recent years that Syracuse had 4 losses by Christmas, right? They're currently 5-5, but there's been a couple of those years they've been straddling the 4-loss line by Christmas. Of those 4 instances, they made the tournament once. I believe they made the NIT twice, and there was I'm not sure what happened on the third one there. I'll have to check Mike's article to be sure there, but they've dug themselves a bit of a hole. My question is, what kind of ACC are we looking at? Because the ACC is down. There's currently one team in the ACC ranked. You certainly know who that team is, Duke. There's one team that is in the others receiving votes category, right? Normally, we're talking about the ACC on any given year, any given week, frankly, in college basketball. There's 3 or 4 ACC teams ranked, and there's probably 3 or 4 more in the others receiving votes category. 1-1 at this point. So my fear is for Syracuse that, let's say they win 10 ACC games. What are those 10 games? Is it going to be good enough? Syracuse has a lot of games against the bottom of the league, right? And the rate they're going, they might be at the bottom of the league, right? So you really got to get those impact ACC wins because they've done all they can do in non-conference play. Lehigh and Cornell are not going to make an impact in the wins department. You just kind of have to take care of business and not add another bad loss to the schedule. And maybe Cornell might end up winning the Ivy League, or maybe Colgate digs out of this hole and wins the Patriot League. Maybe there's a surprise team or two in there in non-conference play that moves into the quad 1 or quad 2 area and gives Syracuse some quality wins, or even quality points, if you will, even in a loss at this point. But that's a big concern. What kind of ACC are we looking at here? And can Syracuse really take advantage of what they need to in league play? Now, before we bring in our friend Nate Mink and talk some football here shortly, no one's writing anything off now. Not only because it's way too early to do that, but Syracuse has taught us the last thing you should do is write them off in December, January, February, or March, because they'll just find a way to get in the tournament and make it happen. But, you know, at this point, being 5-5 and with the ACC down, it's going to be a real interesting path ahead for this team. The other thing quickly with the Orange, and we kind of touched on it, is, you know, at this point, they are a team that needed some rest. They needed to get back in the lab. They needed to work on fundamentals. You know, the old Coach P expression, the hottest fire makes the strongest steel. Going 7 games in 17 days, battle for Atlantis, Indiana, 2 rivalry games, only one of those games at home. Boy, you really hope that hardens Syracuse up, because they came out of it 5-5. They came out of it with a couple of losses that you'd like to have back, notably Georgetown. They're a team that's flawed defensively. They've got to improve there. They're a team that, you know, we knew was flawed on the rebounding front. They just kind of have to survive rebounding. They've got to get Buddy Boeheim open again. He's really struggled to get those open shots, and he's going to. I mean, opposing teams are going to come at him with everything they have. He's their main sniper, and why wouldn't you? You got to get Cole Swider a little more consistent from the 3-point line. Don't get me wrong. I love what I've seen from Cole Swider in other areas of the court. We've seen flashes of the 3-point shooting, but the kid can rebound. He had 6 assists against Georgetown. He'll find a way to contribute. And Jesse Edwards has to continue to just develop at the rate he's developing right now. He's been great to watch. I was encouraged to see the bench get a little more run against Georgetown. I think Benny Williams, Symir Torrance, and Frank Anselm in particular looked great in the first half of that Georgetown game. They didn't get a lot of run in the second half, even though that was a team that was kind of at the end of a tired run. So maybe they'll earn their way in and get some more playing time there. But they're at an interesting crossroads here. So I would fully anticipate they take care of business against Lehigh. I think they'll beat Cornell on Tuesday. And then guess what, friends? We take a time off for the holidays, and then it's ACC time. You got Georgia Tech on Wednesday the 29th, and then Virginia on New Year's Day. And away we go into full-time ACC play. All right, that's the hoop side of things. Let's switch gears and talk some football. Let's bring them in, folks, live and in person once again. on the interwebs, Nate Mink, syracuse.com, has returned to Orange Weekly. Hello, Nate. How are you, buddy?
Doing great, Brent. Happy to be here as always.
Great to see you as always. And we've got a couple of football notes to get into. Mainly, of course, signing day comes and goes this week. And Nate, Syracuse couldn't quite make a Deion Sanders-like impact on signing day, but who did, right? He stole the show from all the big name programs, swiping the number one recruit in the country from his alma mater, and was the talk of signing day. So, yeah, he stole the show from everybody, right? And it was incredible to see how that happened and where we're at in the world of recruiting and transfers and name, image, and likeness and all that fun stuff. But what were your takeaways from signing day? Syracuse and all things included. What are you thinking about a day later?
It wasn't just Dion and Jackson State. Texas A&M had a pretty good day. I think if you go and actually look at the recruiting rankings Thursday morning here, you'll see SEC, SEC, Big Ten, SEC, SEC, Big Ten. Future, and that includes future SEC Texas, future SEC Oklahoma, Notre Dame, which is like, a blue blood. It's the same story year after year. The two richest conferences in college athletics absolutely rule the day on this day and this time of year, and that's the SEC and the Big Ten. And I don't know, Brent, what's the playoff field look like this year?
I think you just rattled off those same
SEC,
teams
SEC,
right
Big Ten.
Yeah.
It's Cincinnati, obviously, which is literally a once in a generation type of deal there. So I mean, my main takeaway from signing day, is Syracuse. This ties into Syracuse's plight is that, your bet in recruiting is made institutionally, quite frankly. It is just one of those deals where the coaching staff, they are certainly going to be targeting the best players that they can target and try to build and try to attract the best available players to their institution. But the key word there is available. And the type of recruit that Syracuse goes after is vastly different than the types of recruits that the upper echelon schools in the Big Ten and the SEC go after. And while there are certainly exceptions to every rule, and there's a running back from Calvert Hall that signed with Syracuse a couple years ago named Sean Tucker, who is going to be exhibit A in this conversation. There are guys that slip through the cracks, but last I checked, Alabama isn't hurting for running backs. Ohio State as a freshman All-American at running back, they're not hurting for running backs either. So they're good. My point, I guess, is that it's a big recruiting landscape. It's a big country. There are a lot of good players out there, and you got to do the best you can. But in terms of those, the real impact positions that coaches will point to as difference makers, quarterback, defensive line, offensive line, special wide receivers, special cornerbacks. There's just a finite number of those true game breakers that are out there. And, unless you're one of those big schools, you really are making your hay trying to unearth, mostly 3-star recruits and trying to develop them over a period of 4 or 5 years and have it coalesce into a type of season that Wake Forest had this year, like Pittsburgh had this year, like Syracuse had 3 years ago. And then that's for most programs outside of the top 20, that's the name of the game on signing day.
Yeah, and look, I think everybody has kind of a window where they know Syracuse fits into here. That being said, couple of points from yesterday. One, business, he was not up there to, kind of sell, and you never want to oversell these things because, recruits, some pan out, some don't. That's just the case, no matter how many stars they have next to their name. But, he didn't come in and kind of wax poetic about his list of signees, which I have right here, right? He just kind of came in and said, you got any questions, right? And kind of went from there. And, of course, inevitably, the transfer portal factors into this. So 13 players by the end of the day sign on the dotted line. And it is early signing day, which has kind of become signing day, but there still is another day coming in February. Now you got to work on the portal. Meanwhile, they're trying to hire 3 coaches at this point, including probably the biggest one, the offensive coordinator, which I feel like they're getting close to, but maybe we're not going to hear that name for a few days. We'll see how that goes. If they're targeting a coach that's, in a bowl game situation right now, maybe they're waiting until that's over. So we might have to wait a little bit for that. We'll see when Dino hires his OC. But all that in the mix, Nate, some of the numbers, and our friend and colleague Chris Carlson, wrote about this today. This is the lowest rated class that Dino Babers has had in 7 years. Only Duke, right, was the only other school that did not have a 4-star recruit. Like some of these things that, you could take rankings with a grain of salt, but they're not things you want to hear 7 years in, and they're not things you want to hear when you're trying to kind of rally the troops and recover from a 5-7 season. So what's the balance of looking at things you have to kind of take with a grain of salt on signing day, but some things that, are also truth serum, I guess?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it might be factually correct to say, this is Dino's lowest rated class in 7 years. But what was his highest rated class in 7 years? Not top 50, not top 50. So, again, you are just playing in a sandbox that, quite frankly, isn't that different than the sandbox you've been playing in, not just since Dino got here, but not just since you joined the ACC, but going back, 15, 20 years from now. And I think, Brent, for those who didn't see it, I was invited over to Manly last week to, to walk around the facilities. They just announced, the university just announced a huge, massive 9-figure fundraising campaign to renovate Manly Fieldhouse and move Syracuse forward in the facilities arms race. And I got to be honest, the takeaway for me was how candid they were about how far behind they are compared to the rest of the country. The institutions that they are measuring themselves up against, Boston College, Wake Forest, Duke, have all undergone major fundraising campaigns in the last 5 to 10 years. To the point where you have moved past the point where shovels have gone to the ground and you actually see new physical shiny buildings on these campuses. And you know that matters. That matters. And Syracuse, to its credit, finally felt like it got to a point where it could just announce that they want to aggressively and boldly try to raise $150 million to renovate Manley Fieldhouse. But that is a huge piece to the recruiting puzzle. And again, it goes back to, you know is Syracuse, as an institution, not as an athletic department, but as an institution, and that's an important line of demarcation to make here. Let's frame it this way: there's Manley Fieldhouse and the athletic department, and then there's Crouse Hines and the quote unquote campus side of the university.
Right.
Is Syracuse institutionally examining itself honestly in comparison to its peers? And is Syracuse institutionally creating a roadmap for success? And then, if it does create a roadmap to success, this is probably the most important piece. Is it willing to commit to that roadmap once it's established? And a more direct way to say this is it matching the investment and the commitment to football as its peers? And to this point, almost now a decade into ACC membership, the answer has not been yes. Wake Forest, which again you are battling on the field and on the recruiting trail, to honestly mix results. You've beaten Wake Forest and Boston College more than any other schools in
Sure.
the ACC
Yeah.
since you've been here. Wake Forest has better facilities than you right now, and you have to address your weaknesses. These are all things that you know take time to address. I think this is a situation where you know they've had a lot of turnover in the AD chair over the last 10 years. They've had Daryl Gross, they had Mark Coyle, now they have John Wildhack. John Wildhack, is the longest tenured AD that they've had, in this ACC era. It quite frankly takes a little bit of time to put your staffing together, put the people in the right places, and then you can address the issues and try to find resolutions to your problems. And this fundraising campaign is, I think, really the first major step that they're taking to start moving in that direction. And until you commit to that level of resourcing and that level of investment, I don't see a lot changing in terms of where Syracuse is going to rank in the recruiting pecking order here. I
I'm
mean,
with you.
it's
I'm
just
with
it's
you
just the
there.
reality of the
Yeah.
situation.
By the way, your piece was great and really highlighted what Syracuse is up against. And I think this was really the first time they've been pretty honest and upfront about being behind, even though that reality was almost there. I guess my counter to that would be, and you brought up a fair point. There's been 3 athletic directors in the ACC era, but I guess my counter to that would be, what did they expect when they joined the ACC? Did they think when they joined the league 8 years ago, it's just like, oh, great, let's watch the TV checks come in here? And, they built the Ensley Center. They've renovated the Carrier Dome. You mentioned the Manly thing. It's not like they've just been sitting around being like, hey, sorry, there's nothing we can do here. But I just kind of wonder, and maybe these things do take that time. And when you've got 3 different ADs, it kind of interrupts the process here. But to be 8 years into league membership and just kind of wake up to this, I guess, is where the concern lies there. But
Well,
we're already here.
I would say again, the resolutions to all these things aren't necessarily simple, but they are choices. And
They are choices. Very
I will frame it this way. Yes, they poured 9 figures worth of money into the Carrier Dome. They did that. They did that at a time the roof was soon going to collapse. you know, they had no recourse to doing that
exactly. Yeah.
renovation. It was either fix the roof or
You don't have a building. Yeah.
risk a literal disaster from happening sometime in the near future. Uh, the other point I'll say is literally the day after that piece ran about how Syracuse wants to fundraise for its facilities upgrades, Virginia, their university board took action to allocate university money to jumpstart its fundraising effort for their football complex. Syracuse is not allocating any university funds towards the Manly project. It is being allocated. It is being funded entirely on private donations. Again, that is a choice, and if that is the path and course you are taking, so be it. But you just need to be, and I would hope you are going to be transparent with the community of support, the fans surrounding the program, to understand the challenges and what prompted those decisions that have been made as an institution.
They do. And another interesting point, I mean, we can make 100 examples here. You brought up a team within your own conference that just got that funding in Virginia. I look at what Michigan State did. Michigan State, which is a public university, and they're not an apples to apples comparison, but they just gave Mel Tucker, a guy who's been there for 5 minutes, a pretty big extension. That entire thing was covered by 2 donors, right? 2 big boosters. Boom, here's the money. We want this guy, right? So until Syracuse kind of, I guess, finds those kind of boosters and those kind of donors, and I know that John Wildhack has reached out publicly directly to, say, former Syracuse players in the National Football League. And, you never know where some of these donors come from. There was a $25 million donation made by a former player, right? Those are the type of people you're trying to get at, but there's only so many kind of big chunk donations that can come in. Some of it's just, what's the word I'm looking for, Nate, here, when you're talking about fundraising, you're just kind of trying to pile up a lot of littler donations, to just kind of reach a certain point. You get $150 million any way you can get it. And that's the outreach there. And that takes time. So all this factors into recruiting and signing day and all these things we're
But can I
discussing.
make one more point? Because
Yeah,
you
sure.
mentioned
Yeah.
Michigan State, and I got, I guess, a shade of Spartan green on today. But Michigan State, and we have some people in our building who went to Michigan State, so maybe they'll appreciate this as well. Michigan State, Brent, obviously, had a good season with Mel Tucker this year. He did work in the portal. He upgraded his roster, no question. But you mentioned the massive mega deal that he signed this offseason. Upwards close to 9 figures, close to $100 million contract. Michigan State, if you look at their win-loss record, is floating in that 8-9 win territory most years. They are living in that 15 to top 25 range most years, and then every so often they make a run at a Big Ten title. If you ask most Syracuse fans what their expectations are for this program, you're probably going to get that answer.
Right.
We want to be competitive every year, and then every 4 years we want to make a run at a conference title, or we want to be on the fringe of the top 25. Think about everything I just said about Michigan State, and the money and the resources that were invested and allocated to keeping Mel Tucker in check, and then compare that to Syracuse's situation and tell me how that meshes, how you want to expect Syracuse to
It
be a
doesn't.
fringe
No.
top 25 team given the reality of its situation.
They're in the same club, if you will, right? The Power Five, if that's how you want to frame it, but it feels like they're in different galaxies in other ways. And you look around,
I
even
mean,
signing day.
they're running realistically fourth in that division behind Ohio
Right.
State, Michigan, Penn State, Michigan State.
And that's the
And the
money and the
expectations
expectation of
here,
Michigan.
the
Yeah.
expectations here are to be that in the ACC Atlantic. You're not going to be Clemson. You're probably not going to be Florida State most years if Florida State's right. But the expectation is to be, competitive with Louisville, NC State, certainly Boston College, and there's work to be done to get there.
Florida State, for example, I mean, we all saw the story that they lost the number one recruit in the country, but they just gave Mike Norvell an extension after a 5-7 season, right? So, it's interesting how some coaches, you lose 2 years in a row, have a nice day. Some you stick with. Syracuse, of course, made the investment to bring Dino back for a 7th season. So that kind of adds into signing day, Nate. And I wonder how much of that was a factor. And, if you're a recruit and you're looking at it realistically, what if Syracuse has a losing season? Is Dino going to be my coach for the 4 years? Typically I want to be there. The transfer portal's there. You can get out and go somewhere else if it's not to your suiting, but they didn't have a few assistant coaches, notably an offensive coordinator. Now, most of that class was pursued before the coaching changes were made, right? But
Yep.
Syracuse just didn't have a lot going for it in this recruiting run, to be fair, in terms of, momentum. Right. So you're trying to convince people to be the next Sean Tucker. You're trying to find those players that want to take on a challenge and help Syracuse kind of, a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. So specific to the class, Nate, and the players that Syracuse has at this point, what really stood out to you in terms of the players? I mean, anytime you got a guy from Wagga Wagga, South Wales, who's never played American football coming in to punt for you, I think that's interesting. You got a running back by all accounts from New Jersey, and always an interesting mix of players here. But what were the things that popped off the list for you?
Interestingly, the punter is really the exception to the rule here. The punter, as Dino said yesterday, really only started being an actionable item on their wish list, in the middle of this past season. October, November, they decided, all right, we need more help at punter. We're going to go recruit a second scholarship punter. The majority of this class, and every recruiting class, begins one, if not 2 or more years from when they actually sign. They were evaluating guys like LaQuinn Allen for multiple years ago. Dom Foster. That's why I think Dino made the point that the coaching turnover that happened, what, 3 weeks ago, didn't really have much of an impact on this recruiting cycle, because all these guys were locked in, and all the recruiting groundwork was laid over the last year and a half, 2 years. And I think that's just how recruiting works. If you think about it, most of this class was probably being recruited off the 2019 football season.
Right.
When they had a sellout against Clemson, and there was, a pretty substantial buzz around the program until they, finished 5-7, and COVID hit and whatnot. But that's the other thing about this class too, is, they've had to deal with the ramifications and the fallout, like every program did, with COVID, and not having as many in-person contacts and in-person evaluations. And I will say something that happened and occurred at Syracuse, being in New York, that didn't necessarily happen at other programs, is they haven't had summer camps for 2 years. That's a that's a big understated thing that occurred here, that you can't just dismiss. They depend a lot on those summer camps to try to unearth the under recruited guys. How many guys, you don't you don't need Travis Hunter going around camp shopping his skill set. Everybody knows he's the number one player in the country,
Exactly.
but you don't necessarily know who Sean Tucker is unless you go to these camps and you're Reno Ferree and you put your stopwatch out and you time him at 4.3. You don't know who Sean Tucker is unless you physically go to these camps and evaluate him in person. They didn't get Matthew Bergeron until he showed up at their camp on campus from Canada, and they offered him a scholarship. And now he's one of the best offensive tackles in the ACC. So that's a vitally, vitally important piece here that has not been here and not been part of this recruiting formula for 2 years. And so I think you have to weigh that. But there's no doubt the on-field results play a factor in it. There's no doubt facilities play a factor in it. There's no doubt COVID played a factor in it. That's all true. So I would tie it up like that.
Boy, we could do a whole show on the transfer portal, but that's the next step, right? I mean, this is a Syracuse team that has lost. Now, some of these players, Nate, that get counted on this list, they weren't around for long. And no offense to them, they weren't really big factors on the roster. In some cases, some guys didn't even go into the portal. They simply left the team, maybe got into the portal a few months later. But the number is significant. Syracuse is actually, in some cases, pacing the country in the number of players that have left since August 1st. Many of them in the portal. We've seen, obviously, Tommy DeVito go to Illinois. We've seen Luke Benson signed on with Georgia Tech this week. We saw, I'm forgetting, there was a player, remind me, Nate, who signed with Utah this week. Another
Landon Morris.
Landon Morris, right. So what Syracuse has to do, I don't know if you can hear my dog commenting in the background. She's very passionate about this.
She is naming all the names that you.
She's rattling through them all right now. That's exactly right. Yeah. What they've got to do is stem the tide and now make the transfer portal work for you and find some of those players. And I know that's easier said than done because there's over 1,000 players in the portal right now, but the number is what it is. And that's kind of the next step here before the February signing day for Syracuse to get the transfer portal to work for them.
It is. Yeah. I mean, they're going to have to fill out holes on their depth chart, and, you're going to have a choice. You can either bring in a high school player, a freshman, and then you hope you can develop him over 3-4 years. But in the current landscape and climate where people are free to transfer once and not have to sit out, the guarantee that you're going to be able to keep a lot of these guys around for that extensive period of time isn't promised anymore. So I think Dino outlined it, at his press conference on Wednesday afternoon. They're gonna look at it at position by position, and if they see that they are inexperienced and young at a position, then it makes sense to target a transfer at that position and try to grow up a little bit more quickly rather than depend on a bunch of first and second year players, because it's hard to win when you're undermanned like that. The portal, I would also say, is going to be a fluid deal over the next 6 months. I mean, I think you're gonna see more players rush in there after bowl season. When the players that actually did want to decide to stick it out and finish the year with their teammates, I think you'll see players move then. I think you're going to see another wave move in after spring practice when, it becomes apparent to certain guys that they're not on the 2 deep or their roles aren't what they quite envisioned when they started spring ball. And that's Syracuse and that's everywhere else. So, you're going to have really until May 1st to lock in your roster, and then you ride it out through fall or through fall camp and the fall season. So, this is going to be ongoing. They have a lot of room left in their class to fill it with high school prospects or transfers. So, again, how the puzzle comes together remains to be seen. But I think they know internally what their needs are. There's no question that they have to get a little bit more juice at the line of scrimmage. The defensive line in particular is very, very young on paper. They're a little thinned out at running back, given all the attrition there. They're thinned out a little bit at tight end. So they know what their needs are, and I think they're going to do what they can to address those needs before not only spring ball and trying to get guys in ahead of the spring semester, because you got to practice.
They need numbers.
You gotta
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
You
They
need numbers.
literally need players.
You need
Yeah.
numbers to practice. But more so, you want to make sure you fill out your roster going into August.
No question about it. And look, last year at this time, the high priority was quarterback. They had to bring in a quarterback to compete with Tommy DeVito. We saw how that turned out. Garrett Schrader turned out to be what they needed in a lot of ways. But now you got to look at it and say, okay, well, while Schrader has his strengths, can he improve enough in the passing game in the offseason to be a viable candidate there? We haven't really seen what they have from Justin Lamson. We've only kind of heard things, but haven't seen him in game action. We've seen a little bit of Jacoby and Morgan in game action here. So the quarterback position will be interesting to follow as always. And who guides them is the other big question we'll end on here, Nate, the offensive coordinator. And I asked Dino yesterday at the press conference about what kind of offensive coordinator he's looking for. And he said, a guy that can score points and get points on the board, right? So kind of a direct, right to the point, if you will. My question is, what kind of philosophy does this offensive coordinator want to have? Are they going to stick with the ground and pound? Is Dino going to kind of give him freedom to do what he wants to do? You know, Dino kind of always oversees the offense. He's essentially the OC in a lot of ways. So who they target, what kind of philosophy he brings in, and what he can do with the current batch of talent in addition to who they bring in is going to be the question there. So all that said, Nate, in the unknown, what's the best path forward, you think, for a new offensive coordinator, all things considered?
Well, I'll tell you this. None of the players in the program right now have been recruited by their new offensive coordinator. So whoever comes in is going to have to mold and shape and fit the pieces that are here into whatever he deems is the best way to score points. And so I don't know if you're necessarily going to get an offensive coordinator who has a quote unquote system. I think you're going to look for a mind that can come in, evaluate what he has in the room, evaluate the personnel pieces that are there, uh, and then create game plans and create schemes and concepts that give these players the best chance for success. And I know that is so amorphous and nebulous and a bunch of coach speak, but I don't think you're bringing in an air raid guy to start flinging the ball up 55 times a game. I think you look at your pieces. You have uh, in most cases an experienced offensive line returning, albeit some guys coming off significant injuries, but you have pieces that have played up front. You have an all-American tailback in Sean Tucker who is going to get the football. You have a quarterback who has strengths as a runner, has to develop strengths as a passer, but you have an experienced quarterback returning. Wide receiver, you got to get more production out of that position. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Tight end, you can certainly get more production out of that unit. They've been mostly used as blockers.
I don't know, Nate. I'm starting to give up on my cause there to give the tight end more production. I don't see it happening. I don't know.
You have that flex piece in Elmore coming back. So I think whoever comes in is I don't know if you're going to get a significant personnel overhaul at this point. I think Syracuse is Syracuse is going to live and die primarily. They're not going to not get any transfer help, but they're going to primarily live and die by the players who are already here. And that might mean Schrader. It's certainly going to mean Tucker. And in that receiver room, again, short of a couple transfers that you bring in, I think you're going to need big steps forward from guys like Damian Alford. Courtney Jackson needs to take another step forward. The freshman, Amari Hatcher, Haronde Gadsden. Yeah, those are going to be the guys. Again, short of an older vet that you can bring in from the transfer portal, those are going to be the guys that are going to make this offense more explosive and score more points, more so than the coach drawing up the plays. It all goes back to personnel and the pieces that you have here in the program. And
well, maybe a fresh set of eyes is what they need, because some of those names you just said, there's talent there. That's what I think was a little frustrating, concerning, however you want to phrase it, from last year, is the lack of passing game. Maybe it comes back to Schrader. I don't know, but there's talent in that wide receiver group. And I know they lost a couple of guys, and certainly there's opportunity in the portal to find a couple more talented names. But
and they know
whoever
they
takes
know what they're
over,
up
they've got some players to work with.
and they
It's not like it's completely dry there.
well, and they're gonna have to, I said the same thing last year, because as every year, they're gonna have to score points next year. Like Malik Cunningham's coming back for Louisville. Devin Leary's back for NC State. Brennan Armstrong, I guess, could go to the NFL, but if he doesn't go to the NFL, he already said he's coming back to Virginia. Notre Dame's Notre Dame. Clemson's Clemson. Jordan Travis is still at Florida State. You're you know what you're up against, and you know what it's going to take to come out on the other end in the ACC. And you're going to have to score points. And that's why it's a little intriguing on who they bring in for the OC, because the last 2 years, it doesn't help the opponent's scheme and game plan against Syracuse anymore, because you have a new set of eyes in there. You have a new way of doing things in there. You can't just pick up on the habits of the last 2 seasons when you have a new coordinator running the show.
Nate, I think we'll end it right there. Great stuff as always. Keep up the good work as we track all these off-season movements here, and all of our signing day coverage is up now on syracuse.com. And we'll talk to you next time here on Orange Weekly. I know I'll be seeing you pretty soon, but still, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to you, my friend.
Same to you, Brent. Happy holidays.
Nate Mink, ladies and gentlemen, syracuse.com. You know where to find him and read his great stuff, and follow him on Twitter as well at Mink Nate. And as Mike notes here, thanks for all your comments and hanging out with us today, guys. If nothing else, Babers has proven he can get a transfer wide receiver from the portal and put up numbers. Schrader will have to be better. With number 1 reps all season, he will be fine. So Mike is keeping the faith there with Garrett Schrader. All right, folks, I think that's where we're going to end the show for today. Really appreciate you hanging out. If you're watching on the basketball Facebook page, on the football Facebook page, on Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube, just a couple of reminders. One, the show airs live Thursdays at 1 o'clock, but it does archive on our YouTube page. You can find it on social media. It automatically archives on Facebook. I'll tweet it out. Plenty of places to find it in case you miss it. We'll also put up a post on syracuse.com. And a programming note, we're going to take the next 2 Thursdays off for the holidays. So Orange Weekly will return live on Thursday, January 6th, next year, 2022, as we come down the home stretch of 2021 already. Amazing to think about. We're coming up on the end of another year. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks to our friends at Crouse Health, of course. And happy holidays to everybody out there. We do have one basketball post-game show to come after the Georgia Tech game in a couple of weeks. I know we're not going to have post-game shows for Lehigh and Cornell on the basketball side if you look for those shows, but we'll be back for the start of ACC play with a post-game show after Georgia Tech. So we're going to take a little bit of a break here, but back then, until we meet again, happy holidays, happy New Year, everybody, and we'll see you next time here on Orange Weekly.